welcome to Called to Learn Conference. I'm Dave Neal, and we're here today with Karl Beckstrand, and we're going to be talking about humanities. To me, humanities has always been kind of, you hear about it with colleges. You study the humanities. It's always been a vague thing to me. What does that actually mean? Or what is the humanities?
It's the study of art, music, literature, drama, philosophy, anything that conveys culture, makes us human.
Okay, when you say study of, do you mean studying how to make art or studying art that people have made?
It can be both. It can be how to compose music, and it's also learning about great composers and great music.
I've been an actor since high school.
Cool.
Okay, I got excited with West Side Story was the first play I was in. My bigger brothers were in the show, and I loved it. I got the acting bite then.
Okay.
So to me, and then music, I learned to sing because I really wasn't good at singing. Even at that point, I wasn't very good. But I learned to sing through a lot of practice and a lot of hard work to the point where I can sing. To me, the studies, if we said the study of humanities, for me, studying humanities has been learning how to do it and performing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten a lot out of it. For the audience, the people who are watching this, what's in it for them?
Hopefully, a love of what they already love, what's entertaining, music, books, movies, art. And hopefully they'll be able to gain from this conversation an appreciation for how those things not only convey culture, but educate. We learn things, even when we don't want to. If there's a great movie that happens to have some history in it, we're going to learn a little history.
And honestly, some of those movies are some of my favorites, are historical movies, whether it's historical fiction or historical,
dramas.
Historical dramas. Because either way, one of the things that's great about novels, and I like to read a lot of novels, often spy novels or whatever, but you wind up learning, they have to write stuff about the country in order for them to talk about the country, and they look like idiots if none of it's true.
Right.
So I find I learned a lot. I've learned a lot about a lot of different stuff by listening to audiobooks and by watching historical fictions and stuff.
Yeah, a couple of my favorite books. Well, I'm reading right now Into the Storm by Winston Churchill. He has two books actually. So he's got The Gathering Storm and Into the Storm, about how we led up to World War II and then what happened in World War II. And they're fabulous adventure stories, and they're true.
Really? That sounds interesting. How big are they?
Oh, about that biggie.
Okay, good. So you're reading these books and you've watched movies. Is that your credentials? Is that all? Is that what you got, or what gives you credibility to talk to us about humanities?
I was raised by a family that took me to concerts and museums, encouraged me to draw, learn music, perform on stage. So, and not only did they teach and encourage me in those things, but they would come and support me when I had an art show or a presentation or a concert.
So you're an artist.
I do a little bit of everything.
Okay, so you started talking in the beginning, describing what humanities is, and then I interrupted you, and I was saying, acting, performing or studying other people. So where were you going with that?
Well, I think the humanities give us meaning, and the arts are a perfect vehicle to not only transmit culture to the next generation, but for helping us to find meaning, not just in our own lives, but to understand the world around us better and people.
Okay, so can you give us any examples of I mean, you're reading that book, Into the Storm.
Into the Storm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what are you learning from that you didn't know before you started? Because you've clearly learned about World War II and you know something about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm mostly a student on that because I haven't studied it much. But what I'm learning from this book is sometimes we try to be nice and we actually do harm. This is what happened with Germany after the First World War. Germany started breaking conditions of the treaty by amassing arms and training troops when they weren't supposed to. It was against the law according to the treaty. Right. And all the other countries just wanted to play nice. Well, we don't want to be mean. Right. We'll just let them break the rules. Right. And then millions of people died.
Yeah. So what you're talking about here is you're talking about a principle that you pulled out of that. Do you think that was a principle that he intended?
Absolutely. I believe Churchill was one of the few people who could see from the beginning the mistakes that were being made, and just one person often We talk about one person can make a change, but sometimes they can't.
Right.
And he was giving warnings. But
is that usually what you find in the humanities, is principles?
Yes. It's funny that you should ask that, because I think people actually seek the humanities for entertainment. They seek them for escape.
Yeah.
But you're right. Values and principles, you can't help but convey those things. They just happen.
That's true, because in fact, that's one of the reasons I suppose that we ought to be aware of and careful of the stuff we watch and we choose to watch. I enjoy laughing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who doesn't, right?
Right.
I enjoy watching sitcoms.
Okay.
And some are better than others. My favorite sitcom has always been the Dick Van Dyke Show. And there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of more modern sitcoms that actually are a bunch of junk.
Right.
And I've had to watch some. I've had to stop watching some, even though I'm laughing the whole time. I'm just like, there's not good stuff in here.
Yeah. It's a sacrifice. It's hard to feel like, okay, if I want to be a better person, and if I want to have certain principles and stick to them, I don't want to be putting junk into my mind that is counter to those principles.
Right.
And so there's all this wonderful entertainment value, but sometimes you have to make sacrifices.
No, we've been talking quite a bit about television or movies and books.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of the other stuff. So let's take them off. Television, movies, books.
Mm-hmm. Art.
Art. Okay. Art can be pretty expensive. So how do you want to break that out?
It's, even the design of a home is art.
Okay.
If you think about it. Interior design is an art.
Right.
Fashion design is an art. Advertising,
right,
copy and layout is an art form.
right.
If you just restrict it to things you would see on the wall, posters and paintings and photographs, all of those things, though, communicate. And that's the idea. That's what they're there for, is to communicate. Even the cave drawings in France of the beasts, that are thousands of years old, they communicate something. And the challenge with visual art is to interpret. And it's a challenge and it's a blessing, because everybody can have their own interpretation, or you can really think hard and try to figure out what the artist was trying to convey. And sometimes they're positive and sometimes they're negative. Right. And even the negative things teach us.
You said that you've done it all. So I guess you've done theater, you've done singing. Mm-hmm. That suggests you draw or you paint?
Yeah, I draw and
so tell me
illustrated some books.
Okay, so tell me about that part. How are you trying to convey messages when you make a drawing?
Absolutely.
Okay, so when you start with a drawing, do you usually come up with, okay, this is what I want to convey, or just like, okay, let me put some colors together and I'll figure out what's in the part too?
It's kind of a process. I don't think I sit down, and I don't think the average artist sits down and says, okay, I want people to appreciate the starving people in Syria, and so I'm going to make this. Sometimes they do that, but sometimes they start with just the lines and the form and the color, and they think, oh, you know what, this would be, they might find an application afterward, or they might set out with a purpose in the beginning. It depends on the artist.
How would you describe the world if we didn't have the humanities?
It would be pretty dull. There wouldn't be, of course, no paintings on the walls, no posters, no designs for homes, so I guess we'd live under rocks. There'd be no cereal boxes to read in the morning. There'd be no books to read.
So really what you're saying is that humanities is the creative process.
It's what makes life worth living.
And that creative process actually extends beyond paintings on the wall. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about paintings, because paintings are new to me. I mean, I've obviously seen paintings, but I never really cared about paintings until recently. I went, a few years back, I went to the Springville Art Museum for the first time.
It's a great place.
And I have never liked art, because most of the art that I've seen, I'm going to say that I considered it junk. Okay, it was the great masters, because it's just, I look at it, I'm like, especially Picasso, quite frankly, I have very little appreciation for his later stuff. When I saw some of his earlier stuff, I thought, wow, that's really good stuff. Yeah. That's where I started to discover that there's a lot of great art. Yeah. A lot of things. And I heard you talking about a book or a movie or something like that you just like, I'm done watching, I'm bored with it. You said there's a likelihood there is no
conflict. There's
conflict,
a moral
but
dilemma.
Moral dilemma.
Yeah.
And that's what draws people
Yeah.
to a story.
Well, let me explain what a moral dilemma is and why it's important. I think a lot of writers don't get this, even movie directors don't get it. If you ever put down a book halfway through and just didn't enjoy it, weren't getting anything out of it, just never walked back to it, or left a movie theater not because you were offended, but because it was just not very good, I can guarantee you that the writer or director didn't understand what a moral dilemma is. Mm-hmm. Because they can put conflict and fights in there, they can put action and explosions and death and sadness, but for the main character to have a moral dilemma, a gut-wrenching decision that they have to make, that's real drama. That's what everybody on the planet experiences almost daily.
And we learn
and
from
so
that too.
if it's missing, there's something hollow about that story.
Okay.
And then the examples from the scriptures, if you want to find an example of a good moral dilemma, go to the scriptures, because you'll see Adam and Eve and their decision about eating the forbidden fruit, or Joseph of Egypt, choosing to forgive his brothers after all they put him through.
That was all to lead up to this question, going back to the paintings.
Okay.
Where do you see moral dilemmas within paintings? Because they're static.
Mm-hmm. There's a famous Goya painting. I think it portrays the Spanish Civil War, or just the time prior to the Spanish Civil War. And there's a figure standing in front of a group of villagers, and he's got his arms in the air, and there are soldiers lined up to shoot him.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of emotion going on. There's a moral dilemma because the soldiers are there. This man is standing up for his people. Do we shoot him? Do we follow orders and shoot him? Will we have to kill the villagers behind him next? And there's all kinds of symbolism in that picture. That his arms are raised like he's a Christ-like figure. He's all in white, whereas the villagers are all in color. And so a painting, a still image, can convey huge moral dilemmas.
You're right. Yeah, in fact, that was one of the things I discovered when I was at the Springfield Museum, was that the pictures that I was drawn to were the pictures that I could see that there was a story there. See that. So let's talk about the moral dilemmas in other stuff. What else?
So we've talked about movies and books, TV shows, of course. Art, music. Music is, that's a different challenge, but with major and minor keys, you can convey emotion.
Yeah, it's true.
And so a composer can take an audience on an emotional ride without ever having the words to the story, just with the key changes and the modulations and the notes they use.
Yeah, I'm getting chills thinking about it. I saw a friend of mine was telling me her favorite musical was Les Miserables. Mm-hmm. I'd never seen it. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so it was coming to town, so I said, hey, you want to go see Les Miserables? She said, sure. So I get to the show, completely unprepared for it.
It's powerful.
Yeah, I'm choking up and that's thinking about that. It's affecting me now, just thinking about the message that was there, and when I started to feel it, when I started to feel it, I'm like, holy cow, it was powerful. You mentioned that humanities actually save us. How do humanities save us? We've been talking about a lot of good stuff here, but how expand on that?
Well, not only do the humanities perpetuate the culture that nourishes humanity, but they convey values. Humanities, as we've talked about, can be used to destroy values and destroy society. You can use symbolism, metaphor, archetypes, all kinds of things that are representative, and they don't overtly preach, but convey positive things. God still loves his children. Everyone has value. Everyone should be treated with respect. Those are general principles that you can perpetuate through the arts that elevate society.
Okay, and stories and songs. Talk about that.
Well, some of the stories I think that are most inspiring are the true stories. In another segment, I talked about a true story that I was asked to write by a publisher, and I found it in my family history about my great aunt and my great grandmother when they came to America from Sweden as children, not speaking English. And these are things that I'm so glad that my family now has in print, because they can see the courage of these two young girls. They can see their determination to learn English. And see, these things are things that would have been lost if someone hadn't kept a journal and if I hadn't been asked to find a true story about immigrant kids.
Mm-hmm. What of the humanities inspire you?
Oh boy. so many things. I think as I was putting together some presentations over the last week, I was listening to a classical music station, and it's been a while, and I had to stop in the middle of preparation and think, this is great music. I should be listening to this more. Yeah. And it was affecting my emotions in wonderful ways. And I was thinking, this is profound. It has such an impact, and I had forgotten what an impact good music can have.
Handels Messiah popped in my mind, and it's that music and it's the words that were then sung and put to music that just drove that into me. And
it's also, I agree. I've had the same experience. And I feel like the composer was also inspired. I love going to Messiah sing-alongs, and I think I used to do it in California, in Silicon Valley, which is pretty secular. But I would have guessed that you could go up to anybody in that group in the sing-along and say, this was inspired music, wasn't it? And they would say yes.
I obviously have studied the humanities. Yeah. From both ends. I hadn't really thought of it before.
Sure.
What are some ideas you can convey to others on how they can discover humanities? Maybe even me. What are some things I can do beyond what I've done with the music and discovering museums and theater?
I made a list here of things that families or classes could do. They could visit art museums, which you've done, and actually visit artist studios and watch art being created. Then go home and write.
Okay, what do you mean by an artist studio? What is that?
If you go to an art gallery or museum, you could ask the curator or the owner of the gallery, would any of the artists whose work is being displayed allow a visit to their studio? Most have a studio.
Okay.
And you can make an appointment and see how the artist works, what gives them inspiration.
Okay.
And then you can go home and create or paint or sculpt your own art, take pictures of it, post it on social media. For the theater, you've done that too. Of course, go to the theater. Or visit actors in rehearsal, see how it's put together. Or write out and act out your own short play and film it. Yeah. Music, go to concerts, visit musicians in rehearsal, compose your own music, perform your own music, record it, post it. Go to the movies, visit actors, screenwriters, directors. You could actually visit a set if someone gives you permission, and see how a movie is filmed. And then write your own short film and shoot it. Post it on YouTube.
Okay.
And then for literature, of course, libraries and bookstores, you could visit a writer, see what his schedule's like, see how much work is put into writing a book.
How could you? As you're a writer, so how would you convey a message to somebody about writing? Because I could see you just.
Yeah.
But what is there to? Is it? What do you talk to about?
I do have to have a schedule, and I tell everybody who wants to be a writer, you need to make a schedule where you're sitting in that chair at a certain time every day writing. Because otherwise you'll just say, oh yeah, I'm going to write that book someday. Right. But if you make yourself sit every day, even if it's for half an hour, and type or write out, then you'll be on your way.
Okay.
And then so after visiting a writer, you could write your own story, you could publish it in an ebook, you could visit media news stations, talk to the producer, see how the news is put together, upload a video of something that you filmed happening. You could go to a ballet or a concert. You could choreograph your own dance piece, film it.
Okay. And ballet is actually something I discovered for the first time. I've always heard about ballet, and I've heard ballet, and I've heard the music from ballet. And the music actually is to me, you could tell there's a story in there, even if you're not watching anything. And I saw it for the first time in Dallas, and I saw the Nutcracker for the first time in Fort Worth, actually. Fantastic. And I would highly recommend it, just as an experience.
And that's just one dance form. There's many that you could see.
Yeah, okay, looking at this next one, Anthropology.
Sure, so go to a museum and learn about human culture in the past. What was life like, not just in the 1800s, but maybe 500 BC.
Okay.
Things like that.
So I've been to some touring shows, like the Titanic came around, and you see the Titanic event. Yeah. There was Egypt, and there was ancient Egypt and ancient Rome. I've been to those things. Is that the extent of what you can do with anthropology?
Oh, I think
sociology.
I think there's a very broad area in those fields, and I'm the least experienced in those.
Okay.
But I think not only do you have all the different eras, but all the different countries and cultures. It just goes.
Okay, so how would somebody go about learning. I mean, if the show comes through, I'm thinking, hey, that's interesting. Let me go see. But how
you could study anthropology,
books?
or go back to school or learn online.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure there are anthropology courses online too.
Okay. Let's see.
So history, you could go to a history museum.
Those are always good.
Yeah, you could interview someone who's lived in your community for a long time.
I love that idea.
Record the history of where you've lived. Also, your own family history. Interview a grandparent or a cousin or an aunt or an uncle, and record those stories for posterity.
Okay, and then you have philosophy.
Mm-hmm. So learn about great philosophers, and religion falls into that. Theology is also part of philosophy.
I see your list.
Mm-hmm.
How does sports fall into the humanities?
It does. Think about the culture of sports from Athens, Greece, and the Olympics we have today. You could study the history of the Olympics, and that's studying humanities.
Okay. And what about watching the football game or the World Series? Those aren't together. Those are two different sports.
Yeah. I would put that more under anthropology or family history, because it's more perpetuation of our current culture or your family's culture. Yeah. Maybe you all get together every Super Bowl.
Yeah,
see that.
There's a lot of actually principles and stories that are often brought out in the sports.
Oh yeah, values are, like I said, you can't create something without values. Yeah. And even in the middle of a game, I don't know if it was Haidt or Wirthlin talked about doing what was right. You know, he was on top of the football and everybody was on top of him and the line was just a few inches away, and nobody would have seen him move it, but he made a decision not to. And I don't know if they lost the game or what, but he had a clear conscience.
You know what impresses me the most about sports?
Okay.
Like watching a football game or a basketball game or a baseball game is not so much what's happening on the field. It's all that has to go on in the camera room, the guys who are putting it on TV.
Sure.
There's an amazing amount of work. But I mean, I'm not sure how much of that ties to humanities, but other than the creative process.
You're a videographer, so you know what's involved in getting the right camera angles and all those things.
All right, so let's talk about your favorite things, the ways to engage with the humanities.
So I love all of these things. I used to think that music was my favorite, but I don't think I have a favorite anymore. I love story, but that can be conveyed in so many different media.
Right, which is, what I'm seeing here is that stories can be conveyed, and that's what the humanities are. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you. Is there anything about the humanities that I haven't asked you about that you think would be helpful for people to take into consideration?
I would like to read this last note that I have. The humanities instruct us through good and bad examples, choices. They inspire kindness and generosity. They inspire ideas and inventions that make life better. They lift our thoughts to the master creator. Let all that you create or communicate be an attractive, vibrant alternative to moral decay.
Okay, so if you were to take this, all of this stuff that we've been talking about, and recommend to a family on using the humanities in their family, whether it's family home evening, their homeschooling, or what, what would be the best way for them to get started?
Well, we talked about places they could visit and things they could create. I would just add to that everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has values that they want to convey, and maybe they don't feel courageous enough to preach a sermon. But using symbolism in art or music or literature, or just telling a story of, like that football story, just telling a story conveys something that has a huge impact on people.
What I'm hearing is that the central pin of humanities is stories, and it's just a question of how that's being delivered, whether it's through music, through a painting. I guess sometimes there may be no message in the construction of a house, but sometimes there could be.
Often there is, and usually there is in the design of a building.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. That gives me something to think about, is that there's a principle or story at the center of the humanities, and then it's from there. It's basically the way somebody decides to convey it.
Right.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And
Happy
I've learned something about humanities. I actually now have an appreciation for that word, because I've always had an appreciation for the humanities. I just didn't know it. So thank you.